Welcome to Mental Health and You. This podcast brings you the best information and advice from across the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. Every fortnight, we will hear from one of our specialist areas, be it school and parent support, the Recovery College, wellbeing, or research.
Hello, my name is Aoife Dunn. I'm a research assistant psychologist at NSFT.
And my name's Brioney G. I'm Research Development Lead for the Child, Family and Young People's team, and I also work at NSFT.
This is one of the research episodes, and today we'll be talking about the Aspire study. We've previously recorded a few episodes about Aspire, so if you want to hear more about the early stages or co-production, please give one of those a listen. The project is now concluded, and the focus of today's episode will be talking about the findings. So, Bryony, can you tell us a bit about what Aspire is?
Yeah, sure. So Aspire is all about developing a new support package for families where a child has experienced ACEs. That stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And ACEs is a term that's been used to describe a group of traumatic or stressful events that happen to some young people before the age of 18, and that have been linked to an increased risk of negative health outcomes. So that could be poor physical health, but also poor mental health. The sorts of experiences we're talking about are things like being abused or neglected, experiencing domestic violence at home, parental separation, being bullied, or experiencing a serious illness or disability in childhood, those types of things. So the aim of the project was to try and develop something together with young people themselves, their parents and carers, and professionals working in this field that would help parents and carers to support their young people and build up something that we refer to as resilience. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. So the project was funded by the NIHR through their Research for Patient Benefit scheme. The NIHR, I should say, is the National Institute for Health and Social Care Research. And the project lasted 20 months in total, so we've just come to an end. I was really lucky to work with a brilliant team on the project. So did want to make sure I acknowledge the amazing people we've worked with, both the academic team, but also our stakeholder team of people with kind of personal lived experience of this topic who've put in an amazing amount of dedication and expertise to help us with this. So yeah, I'm excited to talk a little bit about what we found out today.
Great. Why was something like Aspire needed?
So yeah, as I mentioned, ACEs are linked with an increased risk of lots of negative outcomes later in life. And actually in high income countries, it's estimated that about 28% of all mental ill health can be kind of directly linked to ACEs. So it's kind of something that's really has a serious impact on young people's futures. But really importantly, we know that not all young people who do experience ACEs go on to have poor mental health later on or other poor outcomes. Some young people, even though they've had really difficult early lives, go on to thrive and live kind of really healthy, happy lives. And the thing that seems to kind of come in between the ACEs and what happens later on is something called resilience. So some young people seem to have this kind of thing we refer to as resilience. That means that even though they have had really difficult experiences early on, they are able to kind of bounce back from those experiences. And we know a little bit about what kind of factors contribute to that resilience. Some of it is kind of internal characteristics, so sort of individual characteristics of the young person. But we know that a lot of it is also about the young person's kind of social environment and the social kind of resources they have to draw upon. So in Aspire, we wanted to try and build both of those things. So build the young person's internal resilience, but also build the support around them. So that was part of the reason that we wanted to have an intervention where it wouldn't just be a professional working directly with a young person, it would be a professional supporting the parent or carer to support the young person. So we were kind of building that young person's support network by building that relationship with a trusted adult in their life. Really important that that adult was a kind of a safe person, wasn't someone that was involved in the ACEs. But we know that those kind of trusted adults in a young person's life can play a really, really important role in building resilience and making sure a young person kind of grows up to be kind of as healthy as possible and to thrive. So yeah, that was kind of the thinking behind Aspire, to try and develop this intervention to build resilience that would involve the young person's parent or carer. And we approached Professor Cathy Creswell about this because she's also already done a lot of work on parent-delivered interventions. She's developed something called parent-delivered CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy for childhood anxiety, which has been found to be a really successful approach. So what happens there is, rather than a professional delivering CBT to a child, a professional supports the parent or carer to learn CBT-based techniques and use those approaches from CBT in the child's day-to-day life. And it's been found that that's just as effective, that parent-delivered CBT, as cognitive behavioural therapy delivered directly by a professional to a young person. And it's also been found to be kind of really acceptable. So by acceptable, we mean that, parents and young people generally kind of like it, they're happy with the approach. So we, as part of Aspire, we wanted to kind of use the learning from that and take a similar approach. But rather than teaching the parent or carer CBT-based techniques, in Aspire, what we were doing was teaching the parent or carer positive psychology-based techniques. Because whereas CBT is something that's been developed to help treat sort of specific disorders, so in this case, anxiety disorders. In this project, we're doing something slightly different because we're working with a group of young people where the young person might not necessarily have a sort of specific kind of disorder, specific symptoms they were dealing with. We're trying to take a more preventative approach and kind of build positives in their life to build the young person's resilience. And that's kind of what positive psychology is all about. So positive psychology is about enhancing an individual's strengths, enhancing a community's strengths. So we wanted to use the learning from positive psychology. It's a relatively new field, but there's been a lot of research over the past couple of decades investigating what sort of techniques can help build the positives and strengths in someone's life. So we wanted to take the learning from that, but apply it to kind of a new approach where it would be a parent or carer delivered intervention using positive psychology to support the resilience of young people who've experienced ACEs. So that was the kind of rationale behind Aspire.
It sounds really interesting. Can you tell us what you did as part of Aspire?
Yeah. So the project had two stages. So there were kind of two work packages, we called them. The whole thing was kind of overseen and guided by our stakeholder team. So as I think I mentioned earlier, there were a group that we worked with who had lived experience of this topic and kind of personal expertise. So that might be that they themselves had experienced ACEs, or that they had experience of caring for a young person who'd experienced ACEs. Some of our stakeholders also had professional experience. So some had led parent-carer support groups, for instance. And they use their expertise to kind of guide the whole project. In the first stage of the project, stage one, we did a couple of things. So we started off by just looking at existing positive psychology interventions. So our research assistant on the project, Isabella, did an amazing job. She looked at over 80 academic research papers and made some great, very intricate spreadsheets where she pulled out lots of details from those research papers about the positive psychology interventions, what they included, so what the components of those interventions were, and what the effects of the intervention were. So how good were they at achieving their aims and what they were trying to do. So we used all the information from that to help us learn what's out there already and what seems to work. So that was the first bit of stage one. Also, as part of stage one, we did some qualitative interviews and focus groups. So that means we basically spoke in depth to people about their experience of this topic. So we did interviews with some young people, some parents and carers, and also professionals who work to support young people with ACEs. And we spoke to them about what they would want from this sort of new support package. What sort of content do they think we should include? How should we be delivering the content? How we should be supporting parents and carers to do this sort of work with their child? We used kind of both those bits of information together, so the information about the existing positive psychology interventions and the information from the interviews and focus groups about what young people, parents and carers and professionals would want from this sort of intervention. And it was all fed back to our stakeholder team. We then held some intervention development workshops where we worked with our stakeholder team to come up with an initial design for our support package. So they made decisions on what they thought should be included as part of it, also what shouldn't be included as part of it. That was a really important part of the discussion too. And yeah, we kind of worked together to come up with our initial design and put something together.
And the support package you created, what did that actually entail, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so a really key message that came through from our kind of stage 1 work was that the support package needed to be really flexible and not a kind of one-size-fits-all thing. So the way that we tried to accommodate that was create a support package that was split into modules that families could choose from. So there were 3 modules as part of the package. There was one that we called How You See Yourself, which was about helping the young person to kind of think about themselves, their strengths, their future, kind of what they would kind of like to work towards, that sort of thing. There was a module called Thoughts and Feelings, which was about working with the young person to identify their emotions and how those link to their their thoughts and behaviours. Developing better kind of emotion regulation skills, I guess you might say. Better abilities to kind of manage difficult, strong emotions. And then the final module was called Social, and that was about building up the young person's social skills, helping them to think about who they have around them in their support network, that kind of thing. Within each module, there was a choice of different activities that their families could choose from. And the idea was that they would kind of pick the thing that they thought was most kind of relevant to their child's needs, to what they wanted to work on, but also that would fit with the young person's kind of interests and strengths. So that was something that, again, came through really clearly in our earlier work, was that this needs to be something that's going to be engaging for children. I don't think I've mentioned yet, but our kind of target age group for this intervention was ages 8 to 12. We were kind of told very clearly that it needs to be something that's fun. It can't just be a dry series of worksheets that they're working through. So to try and make it as fun and engaging as possible, we included a range of different activities. So we included some that were kind of creative arts and crafts based activities. We included some that were kind of game and movement based. We included some that were screen based or technology based. And then there were some that were kind of paper based and sort of more quiet activities. So the idea was that there would be something that would kind of catch the interest of kind of every young person. Maybe that's a bit ambitious to think every young person, but as wide a range of young people as possible. So within these modules, there was in total 14 short videos which explained some of the key topics that we were trying to introduce. We encouraged parents and carers to watch those videos together with the young person. There were also some videos that were just for the parent and carer, which were kind of webinar style videos to give them some of the key background to help them to feel confident to then deliver the activities with their children. There were then 30 activity cards, which contained the instructions for each activity, explained what we hoped the young person would get out of the activity, any materials that were needed, and gave some tips on how to do the activity in a really kind of positive, supportive way. And then we also developed some graphic resources to support the activities. So there are a range of kind of handouts, colourful cards, worksheets, that kind of thing. And we also sent out some arts and crafts activities, arts and crafts materials, to each family, so that they kind of had everything they needed to do the activities. Alongside this kind of package of resources that we developed, also really importantly, each family was supported by an Aspire facilitator. Because again, in our stage 1 work, we were told that it was really important that parents and carers just weren't left on their own to do this with their young person, that they needed to feel supported and be supported in a kind of a flexible way that worked for them. So the Aspire facilitators received training from us as the research team, so that they were really familiar with the support package and the things that were in it, and also the principles behind it. We kind of made clear the kind of approach we wanted facilitators to take to supporting families, that we wanted them to really try and empower the parent or carer, to kind of be there as a supporter and encourager, to definitely be non-blaming. That was something that in our interviews, lots of parents and carers said that they'd had some experiences of feeling perhaps quite blamed or criticised in the past. So we made it really clear that that was a really important part of this approach, that we wanted to avoid doing that at all costs, and instead really encourage the parents and carers and recognise the amazing work that they were doing in doing this work with the young people to build their resilience. So the facilitators offered contact with the parent or carer to support them and to kind of guide them through the package, to help them select activities that might fit best for their young person, and to adapt the activities as well where needed. So an activity perhaps didn't quite fit the individual family, they can make suggestions for how kind of the same aims could be achieved just slightly differently. So they offered up to 8 sessions to do that. But there was a lot of flexibility in exactly how many sessions they did offer, so it didn't have to be all 8. And the sessions could be done in different ways. So they could be done over the phone, over video call, or face-to-face, depending on what worked best for the individual family and for the facilitator as well. So we tried to keep it as flexible as possible.
And in the second part of the project, you invited some families to try out the new support package. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So once we'd created our sort of first draft, I guess, of the intervention, we wanted then some families to try it out to see whether it was good, whether we needed to make any changes before going any further. So that was the aim of the second stage of the project. So we invited 12 families in total to be part of the project. So each family had a child who was between the ages of 8 and 12, who the parent or carer felt had been significantly impacted by at least one ACE. And the families all had a chance to try out the support package, but some started it straight away, and some started it after a waiting period. So it was what we call a waitlist control study. So we had six families in our kind of immediate group and 6 families in our kind of waitlist group who started after 10 weeks. All of the families completed some assessment measures for us, so filled in some questionnaires before they started the support package, and then afterwards, and then one more time for the immediate group. And at the end of them trying out the support package, we invited them to take part in an interview if they'd like to kind of feedback about the experience. So both the parent carer and the young person, if they'd like to tell us, what do they think of it? Did they find the resources that were provided useful? Did they find the support useful? Was there anything that perhaps didn't work quite so well for them? They think that perhaps need to be kind of changed or adapted before we went any further with it. And we also spoke to our facilitators as part of the research as well. So they were kind of participants in their own right too. They were also trying out how the intervention would work for them. How would they find supporting families to use the support package materials? And we did focus groups with facilitators at the end, so we could get their kind of thoughts and reflections on how it had gone, how they'd found supporting the families.
Can you tell us about some of the findings?
Yeah, sure. So there were kind of 3 things that we were really interested in at this stage of the research. So first of all, we wanted to know about kind of feasibility and practicality. So would it be possible to deliver this support package as we intended? So we were looking at things like, would people sign up to be part of this study or not? And if they did sign up, would they kind of stick with it? So would they actually use the resources or not? Would they perhaps find they didn't really work for them and stop using them? So we kind of we're looking at that as our kind of first point. We were also interested in acceptability. So I think I mentioned earlier, so that was about did families like it? Did facilitators like it? Is it something they thought was okay for them to be doing? And then finally, really importantly, we're interested in safety. So we collected information on any negative effects that families might have experienced through being part of the project and trying out the support package. So we wanted to check that there were no kind of serious safety concerns that might mean that we wouldn't be able to progress any further with this project. So I'll try and talk through each of those in turn. So feasibility, acceptability, and safety in terms of our findings. So first of all, feasibility. We had a really good amount of interest in the project, which was great. We'd originally intended to only recruit around 6 intervention facilitators, but we had so much interest that in the end we recruited 12 because we wanted to kind of recruit the maximum that we could. And given that we were looking for 12 families, 12 was obviously the maximum number of facilitators we could have. And those facilitators came from across a really wide range of sectors as well. So we had some who were from education, some who were from health, some from social care, and some from the voluntary sector. So that was really nice to be able to kind of try out how the support package worked across different organisations who may be interested in using it in the future. See how well it fits within each of those settings. We also managed to find families to take part relatively easily. Originally, we'd allowed 5 months to find our 12 families, and we managed to do that within 3, which was great. I think it's fairly unusual that research projects manage to find all their participants quicker than they'd expected. That was really positive. All of the families who started the intervention engaged with their facilitator and tried out at least some of the support package resources, which was brilliant. So the average number of sessions that was completed was 5.6. So there was between 3 and 8 sessions per family, 8 being the kind of maximum that we'd set. And parents and carers attended 86.8% of support sessions offered, so on average. Really good levels of engagement, we thought. We also asked families to fill in a checklist to say how much of the resources they'd used, and also to kind of rate the approach of the facilitator. The ratings of the facilitator's approach were amazing. We had some really great facilitators involved in the project. So we got an average of, so the maximum was 18 for kind of the highest rating that they could give for their facilitator's approach. And the average was 17.8. So really, really high ratings for the facilitators, which was, fantastic. And 10 of the 11 parents said that they had used material from all 4 optional modules, which was amazing. All really kind of positive stuff in terms of how well the support package was used by families. So that's great. So we were kind of satisfied that this intervention seems to be usable and sort of feasible to deliver in the way that we had initially planned. So that was really good. So then thinking a little bit more about acceptability. And again, generally the acceptability seemed to be really good. So we did, as I mentioned, interviews with families who'd taken part and with facilitators. Generally, they were really positive about the experience and said it had been kind of an enjoyable experience and they valued. So we've got a quote from a young person that we just wanted to share that we thought kind of exemplified some of what young people told us about the experience of trying out the support package.
The activities were really fun. I like that we were able to share emotions and explain them to each other.
So I think that was quite typical of the sorts of things young people told us, that they'd found the activities fun generally. Not all of them. There were the odd few activities that some young people hadn't liked, which is absolutely fine. But in general, they enjoyed the activities and really enjoyed spending time with their parent or carer and perhaps talking to them about some things that they might not usually in their day-to-day life. So that was really lovely to see. The parents and carers also really valued the intervention. They valued the chance to talk with the facilitator and have that support there. They enjoyed the time with their young person and perhaps thinking about their young person in a slightly different way to they might usually. Lots of parents and carers said they really enjoyed learning about their young person's strengths and helping the young person to recognise their own strengths. That was really lovely. So yeah, quick quote from a parent or carer here about how they felt about the intervention.
It was a lifeline. Because it can be a very isolating, lonely place when you've got all this going on with your kid.
And the facilitators as well were really positive about the experience of supporting the parent or carer through the process. Quite a few facilitators spoke about really liking the proactive approach that was taken. So some said they spent quite a bit of their time working with families when things have perhaps kind of gone wrong and they'd reached a crisis point. So finding it really nice to do something kind of positive and proactive, kind of building on using the family's strengths. So this was a quote from a facilitator highlighting that.
It's lovely to be able to deliver something positive and working together rather than going in at that point where they're struggling so much that they're sort of on the floor.
So yeah, that was really lovely to hear all those positive bits of feedback from young people, parents and carers and families. So that reassured us this generally seems to be a kind of well-liked kind of approach. People that we spoke to also talked about the impact that they felt it had. Parents and carers spoke about the young person seeming more confident often, having kind of identified things that they liked about themselves and things that they wanted to work towards. And they talked a lot about the increased connection that they felt they had with the young person, and that they felt that they'd kind of bonded and kind of strengthened their ability to have conversations that they perhaps otherwise wouldn't have done. And we're really pleased when young people had sometimes increased their ability to kind of talk about and describe their own emotions, so increase their emotional vocabulary. And they felt that had also helped them to become close with their young person because they could kind of better understand what the young person was experiencing. And I found that really helpful. So that was great.
I would say we're connected more. I would say we talk about feelings more. I think it's because of the activity that we've done over the last few months that had triggered that conversation and that connection to allow us to have that kind of conversation.
I would say that lots of parents and carers, this was reflected by the facilitators as well, felt that it was still kind of very early days with the improvements they were seeing. So most families said that they had noticed that the young person had benefited from the intervention in some ways. But often they felt like these were relatively kind of small steps, but they felt that the true impact of the support package would be seen longer term. So all of the parents and carers we spoke to said they were planning to carry on using the support package, whether that was using the activities themselves or using things they'd learned from the activities, so kind of the principles of them with their child day to day. And they felt that was what would really have the impact, was kind of continuing that approach. So that was great to hear as well. Something that we did really want to highlight, though, was that it wasn't necessarily a suitable approach for all families. We did have one family that fed back that the support package really wasn't right for her child and just didn't meet their needs. So this is a quote from that parent or carer.
I found a lot of the activities were geared for neurotypical children. If he can't do something, he gets so frustrated with himself.
So that's something we really want to think about more going forwards. How can we make sure that this support package is accessible for as many families as possible and meets the needs of as many young people as possible? So we've been considering how we could potentially kind of offer some adaptations to activities to kind of help families to sort of flex the activities. They're still kind of using the same principles, but in a way that their young person is better able to access. But the overall kind of message, I guess, we got back from the feedback from everyone who was involved in the feasibility study was that they'd really like to see this go further and for the support package to potentially be offered to more families in future. This was a quote from a parent or carer that kind of illustrates that point.
I genuinely hope that Aspire actually gets launched properly, fully, permanently to people, because I think there is a gap there that needs to support families. I just think it would be really, really good if this can be rolled out to help more parents, basically.
So that was really lovely to hear again. Really positive findings about the acceptability of the overall approach, which was great. The final thing that we looked at very carefully was safety. So we monitored for any serious adverse events that happened during the study, and thankfully there were none. We also asked parents and carers to fill out a questionnaire which asked about lots of potential negative effects that psychological therapies can potentially have. And we did find that quite a lot of parents and carers did report that there were at least some adverse effects of the therapy, which was interesting. But generally, these were rated as not a problem or only a slight problem. And through the qualitative interviews, we got the very clear impression that for most families, any negative effects of the intervention were very clearly outweighed by the positive effects. But yeah, as we said earlier, that wasn't necessarily the case for all families. So we had one family where they didn't feel the intervention had worked for them, and potentially thought that it had some negative effects on the young person, in terms of the young person becoming frustrated, as was mentioned in the quote. So yeah, that's something we do need to be really mindful of going forwards, we think, making sure that the intervention, this support package, is the right fit for the particular family, because if it's not the right fit, there is that potential to cause some distress, which obviously we really want to minimise as much as possible. The other interesting thing that came out of looking at potential adverse effects was that for some parents and carers, potentially doing this sort of work might kind of trigger some potentially painful realizations about themselves and their own past difficult experiences they themselves have been through. Kind of may prompt them to kind of think more deeply about things that have happened for them. So that's something as well that we're going to be kind of careful and mindful about, making sure that the parent or carer has support for their own well-being. It seemed like the facilitator fulfilled that role to some extent. But we're mindful that for some parents and carers, they may need kind of more intensive support. So making sure that we're able to identify where that's the case and signpost on to appropriate sources of further support where a parent or carer might need it. But overall, we felt that it seems like the support package was feasible to deliver, acceptable to most of those involved, and we didn't have any serious safety concerns. So we kind of met our initial criteria that we were looking at to see whether this might be something that's worth continuing.
And what's next for Aspire?
So this project was all about sort of developing the intervention with our stakeholders, and testing out that initial kind of feasibility, acceptability and safety. But there's still quite a long way to go in terms of kind of researching this intervention and seeing whether it is something that would be suitable to be rolled out more widely. That is our eventual hope, that if this is something that could potentially be beneficial, that it could be offered nationally across a range of settings. But before we get there, we need to do a little bit more work just to check that it would be applicable across a wider range of areas. So we're interested in, would this be culturally appropriate if we were kind of moving to a broader group of young people and families? Because we were trying out this intervention in Norfolk and Suffolk, it's a sort of less kind of diverse area of the country in terms of ethnicity than some other parts of the UK. So that's something we're quite interested in, is if we're moving to parts of the UK that are perhaps more culturally diverse, would it be appropriate across all families? So we'd like to speak to some families about that, to see whether there are any adaptations we'd need to make. And we also need to kind of look and see, would this kind of fit equally well across services across the country? Because we know that support services for children and families vary quite a lot across the country. So we want to try and maximise the chances that this would be a kind of a good fit in other places. And then we'd really like to try and test whether the intervention works, essentially. So is it helpful in helping families to improve their young person's resilience and to ultimately decrease the chances that they'll experience poor mental health later in life? We got some positive indications of that through this study, but we haven't really been able to kind of test and establish whether that is the case yet. So we'd like to do some research to find that out. And we'd also like to see whether this approach offers value for money, because if we're asking people potentially to kind of fund this being rolled out, they'd quite likely to want to see that their money is going to be spent well, and the money that's spent would be kind of justified by the potential benefits. So some kind of cost effectiveness type analyses would be really helpful for that later on. So we're looking into doing that future research at the moment, speaking to our kind of stakeholders and getting some advice from people who kind of know lots about this sort of thing, to try and think through how we could do this future research and maximise the chances that it will be successful.
Thank you so much, Bryony. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing about the findings of Aspire. And thank you to our listeners for sticking with us with this episode. If you have any questions or want to find out more about Aspire, you can email the research team at aspire@nsft.nhs.uk. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Aoife.
Thanks for listening. Please do subscribe. It's free and means the podcast will automatically download every fortnight. Do rate and review Mental Health and You, and follow our social media accounts. They're all in the show notes. And more than anything, look after yourself.